Special Education by Lisa Jelinek.
Your child has been having difficulties learning in school. Will services from the Special Education Department help? This is an informative video about special education. I want to give you some history of special education and tell you about some important laws for children with disabilities. I will then inform you about the categories of disabilities. We will then move into your rights as a parent, followed by the assessment and the individualized education plan processes. Following that, I will give you some special education services along with some modifications that your child could use. Lastly, I will give you the South Dakota parent rights. If you ever have any questions in the process, please ask. If I don't have the answer, I will find it for you.
The history of education for students with disabilities. Residential schools for people with special needs began to appear in the 1800s. Most schools worked with the deaf, the blind, or the mentally challenged. They avoided students that were severely disabled. The severely disabled were mostly put into asylums. The first school in the U.S. It opened in 1817 at Hartford, Connecticut. It served the deaf. The Perkins School for the Blind was the first school that served the blind. It proved that the blind could be educated by teaching Laura Bridgman. Anne Mansfield Sullivan came from the Perkins School of the Blind. She taught Helen Keller, who was deaf and blind. In the beginning of the 20th century, community-based programs began to appear. Mostly arts and crafts were done, and very little attempt was done to educate the children. Legislation for people with disabilities. The first law that I am going to talk about is the Vocational Rehabilitation Act of 1973, Section 504. It required that no otherwise qualified handicapped individual in the United States shall, solely by reason of handicap, be excluded from the participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. This mostly applied to the discrimination in employment. The amendments in 1974 said that all recipients of the Department of Education funds that operate public elementary and secondary programs must provide a free, appropriate public education to each qualified individual with a disability. And there was some confusion after this legislation was passed about what a disability was. So the Office of the Civil Rights said a person is considered disabled if the person has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more of such person's major life activities, has a record of such impairment, is regarded as having such impairments. And some of those major life activities were caring for oneself, performing manual tasks, walking, seeing, hearing, speaking, breathing, learning, and working. The next law, the Education for All Handicapped Children Act of 1975, Public Law 94-142. It said that all people between the ages of 3 and 18 must be provided with free and appropriate public education. The education program must be designed to meet the child's needs in the least restrictive environments. Amendments of 1983, Public Law 98-199, extended the fiscal authorization for the federal aid to state and local school systems through 1987, increased assistance to the children who were deaf and blind. It expanded services for children from birth through 5 years of age. The amendments of 1986, Infants and Toddlers with Disabilities, Public Law 99-457. It established statewide, comprehensive, coordinated, multidisciplinary, interagency programs of early intervention for infants and toddlers with handicaps and their families. This law addressed easily recognized needs of the very young with disabilities. However, There are many conditions that are not immediately recognized. Services are provided through the Department of Education in each state. The last law is the Individual with Disabilities Education Act of 1997. It is formerly known as the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. It was organized into 4 parts. Part A, General Provisions. Part B, School Age and Preschool. Part C, Infants and Toddlers. And Part D, Support. Who has a disability? Categories of disabilities. Autism, a developmental disability that affects verbal and nonverbal communication and social interaction. Deafness, a hearing impairment so severe that a child is impaired in processing linguistic information through hearing. Deafness, blindness, hearing and visual impairments that cause communication and other problems that affect a child's educational performance. Hearing impairment, an impairment in hearing, whether permanent or fluctuating, that affects a child's educational performance. Mental disabilities, sub-average general intellectual function that exists with deficits which affects a child's performance in education. Multiple disabilities, 2 or more impairments which causes severe educational problems. Orthopedic impairment, an orthopedic impairment such as a clubfoot or an impairment caused by disease that affects a child's educational performance. Moving on to other health impairments, which is having a limited strength, vitality, or alertness due to chronic or acute health problems. Tourette syndrome, a neurological disorder that includes repetitive involuntary movements or tics. Emotional disturbance, an inability to learn that cannot be explained by intellectual, sensory, or health factors. Specific learning disabilities, a disorder in one or more of the basic psychological processes involved in understanding or in using language. Speech or language impairment, a communication disorder such as stuttering, impaired articulation, a language impairment or a voice impairment that affects a child's educational performance. Traumatic brain injury, an injury acquired to the brain caused by an external force, resulting in total or partial functional disability that affects educational performance. Visual impairment, including blindness, a visual impairment that, even with correction, affects a child's educational performance. Pervasive developmental disorders, a delay in social, language, motor, and/or cognitive development. Your rights as a parent. Public agencies must notify parents when the agencies propose or refuse to initiate or change the identification, evaluation, or educational placement of the child or the provision of a free and appropriate public education to the child. Parents have the right to inspect and review all records relating to their child that a public agency collects, maintains, or uses regarding identification, evaluation, or educational placement of the child or the provision of a free and appropriate public education to the child. Parent consent is required before a child may be evaluated for the first time. Parents have the right to obtain an independent educational evaluation of their child. Parental consent is required for a child's initial special education placement. Parents have the right to challenge or appeal any decision related to the identification, evaluation, or educational placement of their child or the provision of a free and appropriate education for their child. The assessment process. Notice must be provided to evaluate a child, and informed consent of parents must be obtained. No single procedure shall be the sole criterion for determining eligibility. The child must be assessed in all areas of suspected disabilities. Determination of eligibility shall be made by a team of qualified professionals and the child's parents. Types of assessments and procedures to diagnose learning disabilities. Intelligence tests, also called IQ tests. These instruments measure aptitude. IQ tests include activities designed to provide a complete picture of how students learn. Typical tests include language-based and visual reasoning. Developmental and social history, usually completed by parents or guardians. These narrative questionnaires provide important facts about the student's development. Records review. Research on the student's background can help examiners identify other factors possibly contributing to the child's learning problems. Behavioral observations may identify factors in the classroom affecting the student's learning. Achievement testing determines the child's current academic skills. Adaptive behavior assesses a student's ability to perform tasks necessary to maintain self-care, interact in socially appropriate ways, and to safely work in and around his school and home. The Individualized Education Plan, or IEP, process. Setting up an IEP team meeting date. The team chairperson will contact you to attempt to schedule a time and place that is agreeable to all involved. The parent should receive a written notice of the meeting. The IEP team. The parents, a school administrator, a special education teacher, the classroom teacher, a school psychologist or other evaluation professional, related service providers, a guidance counselor, others you or the school determine necessary, when appropriate, the child. The meeting format. Introductions of participants and a brief explanation of their roles in the school and their involvement with your child. You will be given a copy of the parents' rights. The team will review assessment scores and progress data to determine your child's present level of performance. Goals and objectives will be written to help the child improve. A written summary of the meeting is prepared and you should receive a copy of it. If you disagree with the team's decision, share your concerns with them. What the IEP should accomplish. The parents and the school personnel should decide what the child's needs are and what services will be provided to meet these goals. Resolve any differences between the parents and the school personnel. Serves as a commitment of resources necessary to enable the child to receive needed special education and related services. Serves as a compliance and monitoring document that may be used to determine if the child is receiving a free, appropriate public education. Serves as an evaluation device for use in determining the child's progress. The services that may be provided. Special services that can be provided. Speech-language therapy, audiology services, interpreting services, psychological services, counseling services, physical therapy, occupational therapy, orientation and mobility services, parent counseling and training, school health services, school social work, assistive technology service. Modification and accommodations with examples of each. Presentation accommodations allow a student to listen to an audio recording instead of reading a text, hear instructions orally, or be given a written list of instructions. Response accommodations allow a student to give responses in a form that's easier for him, whether it be oral or written. Capture responses on an audio recorder, or use a calculator or table of math facts. Setting accommodations allow a student to work or take a test in a different setting, such as a quiet room with few distractions. Sit where he learns best, For example, near the teacher. Take a test in a small group setting. Timing accommodations allow a student to take more time to complete a task or a test, have extra time to process oral information and directions, and take frequent breaks, such as after completing a task. Scheduling accommodations allow a student to take more time to complete a project, take a test in several time sessions or over several days, or take a test at a specific time of day. Organizational skills accommodations allow a student to use an alarm to help with time management, have help coordinating assignments in a book or a planner, or receive study skills instructions. Assignment modifications allow a student to complete fewer or different homework problems than peers, write shorter papers, or answer fewer or different test questions. Curriculum modifications allow a student to learn different material, such as continuing to work on a multiplication while classmates move on to fractions, get graded or assessed using different standard than one for classmates, or be excused from particular projects. South Dakota Parent Rights. A copy of the procedural safeguards notice must be given to the parents of the child with a disability at least once every school year. The school must provide a written notice 5 days before proposing to initiate or change or refusing to initiate or change the identification, evaluation, or educational placement of the child. The 5-day notice may be waived by the parent. The school must get the parent's consent to do an initial evaluation of the child. The school must get the parent's consent before providing special education and related services to the child for the first time. The school must get the parent's consent to reevaluate the child. Parents have the right to an independent educational evaluation of the child at public expense if the parents disagree with an evaluation obtained by the school. Parents have the right to see all educational records. If the parents find something in the child's file that they believe to be incorrect, false, or go against the child's rights, the parent has the right to request that the information be changed or deleted from the file.
I hope you have found this video informative. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask. I have attached some links to my webpage for you to look at. I've included a timeline for the IEP process too. Thank you for your time.